The year is 2019. The room smells of copper, yeast, and something sweet. Something like rain on hot asphalt. It's the smell of fermentation, the smell of transformation. Julian Croft holds a bottle up to the light. The glass is heavy, clear liquid inside, perfectly clear. The label is simple, cream-colored paper, elegant font. Peninsula Spirits, it reads, and below that, Matheson Tart Cherry Vodka. He turns the bottle in his hands. A man in a suit, a distributor from Chicago, clears his throat. He says, "This is the one." He says, "This is the one that won double gold in San Francisco." Julian nods. He doesn't say anything. His eyes are on a smaller line of text, down at the bottom of the label. It says, "Fruit sourced exclusively from the Matheson Orchard, Leelanau County." The man from Chicago keeps talking. He talks about market penetration. He talks about case orders. He talks about price points. Julian isn't listening. He's remembering a phone call from 4 years ago. A woman's voice, steady but tired. She had a question, a strange one. She asked if he had any use for ugly cherries. The distributor finally stops talking. He notices Julian's silence. He asks, "Something wrong?" Julian looks at him. He taps the bottle. He says, "The co-op told her this fruit was worthless." He says, "They told her to let it rot on the trees." The room goes quiet. The smell of yeast hangs in the air. The man from Chicago just stares at the bottle. He sees a product. Julian sees proof. Proof of the gap between what someone says you are worth and what you are. This channel is built on stories like that one. Stories about people who were counted out. People who were told no. People who looked at a system that didn't work for them and decided to build their own. If you believe those stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Because what happened in that orchard is a story you need to hear. Let me tell you about Eleanor Matheson. Eleanor was born of the dirt, not in a poetic sense, in a literal one. Her grandfather, Thomas Matheson, bought the land in 1922, 160 acres on the Leelanau Peninsula. He cleared it with 2 mules and his own 2 hands. He planted the first Montmorency cherry trees in 1925. Those trees were her landmarks, her calendar, her inheritance. She knew them not as a crop, but as individuals. The old one by the fence that leaned east, its bark scarred by lightning from the storm of '78. The row of young ones her father planted the year she married Robert. The ones her own son helped plant before he left for the city. By 2015, Eleanor was 68 years old. Her hands were a map of her life. Calloused from pruning shears, stained from cherry juice, strong from a lifetime of work. Robert had been gone for a year. His passing was a silence that had settled over the farm, a missing note in a familiar song. They had run this place together for 45 years. His domain was the machinery, the big John Deere 4020, the hydraulic shaker, the conveyors. Hers was the biology, the soil chemistry, the health of the trees. She could walk a row and know, just by the color of a leaf, what the tree needed. Nitrogen, water, magnesium. It was a language she understood better than English. Now, both domains were hers. The silence of the house was one thing. The silence of the workshop was another. Robert's tools hung on the wall, clean, ordered, waiting. She had to learn them. She had to learn the grease gun and the torque wrench. She had to learn the particular grumble the shaker made just before it needed a new belt. People in town, they worried, they whispered. A woman her age, all alone on that much land. They meant well. She knew they meant well. but their concern felt like a weight, another thing to manage. That spring, the rain was relentless. A cool, damp April bled into a cool, damp May. Perfect conditions. Not for cherries, for fungus. Cherry leaf spot. Blumeriella joppi. It started as small purple dots on the upper sides of the leaves. By June, those dots had grown, turned brown. By July, the leaves began to yellow and fall. The trees looked tired, stressed. Eleanor did everything she could. She sprayed organic copper fungicide at the right intervals. She pruned the canopies to improve air circulation. She did everything the Agricultural Extension Office recommended. Everything her 40 years of experience told her to do. The fungus did not affect the fruit itself, not the taste, not the sugar, not the texture. It only did one thing. It caused cosmetic blemishes, tiny, harmless brown freckles on the bright red skin, the kind of imperfection that nature produces all the time, the kind of imperfection a baker would never notice in a pie, the kind of imperfection a child would never see in a handful of fresh fruit. But it was an imperfection a machine could see, and that was the problem. Harvest came in late July. The air was thick with the sweet almond smell of cherry pits. The shaker hummed its familiar rhythm. The cherries tumbled into the cooling tanks, bright red, plump, perfectly ripe, and freckled. Eleanor knew it was an issue, but she had been a member of the Leelanau Agricultural Cooperative for her entire life. Her father was a founding member. They were neighbors, friends. They would understand. She loaded the first truck, 25,000 pounds of her life's work. She drove the 10 miles to the co-op processing plant, the same plant she'd been driving to every July since she got her license. Frank Gable met her at the receiving dock. Frank was a good man. Everyone in the county would tell you that. Coached Little League for 20 years, served on the township board, deacon at his church. His handshake was firm, his eyes were kind. He had known Eleanor since she was a girl. He respected her. He respected her husband. He respected her family's name. He walked over to the truck. He scooped up a handful of her cherries. He rolled them in his palm. He sighed. It was a heavy sound, the sound of genuine regret. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was quiet, gentle. She waited. He said, "I saw the leaf drop in your orchard last week. I was hoping it wouldn't be this bad." She looked at the cherries in his hand. "They're good cherries, Frank. Brix is high. Taste is perfect." "I know," he said. "I know they are. But you see these spots?" He pointed to the tiny brown freckles. "The processors, they won't take them." "What do you mean they won't take them?" "Their contracts are ironclad, Eleanor. Grade A fancy, no blemishes. It's for pie filling, for dried cherries, for the bags of frozen ones in the supermarket. It all has to look perfect." "But it's just skin deep, Frank. Once it's pitted and cooked." He shook his head. "The problem is the pitters, the electronic eyes on the sorting lines. They're calibrated to see a perfect red cherry. They see these spots, they read them as defects. They'll reject the whole batch. It will jam up the whole line. I can't risk that, not for my other members." Eleanor felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. She had another 25,000 pounds on the trees. "So what are you telling me?" Frank wouldn't meet her eyes. He looked out over the loading bay. He looked at the long line of trucks behind hers. Trucks full of perfect, unblemished cherries. "I can't accept them for the grade A pool," he said. "I just can't." The knot tightened. "What about juice grade?" He winced. "Eleanor, the juice market is flooded this year. The price is rock bottom. I could give you maybe 8 cents a pound. 8 cents. Her cost to harvest was 15 cents a pound. She would be paying to give her cherries away. Frank saw the look on her face. He put a hand on her shoulder. It was meant to be comforting. It felt like a cage. "Listen to me," he said. His voice was earnest, fatherly. "I'm trying to protect you here. Don't spend the money to harvest the rest of them. You'll just be throwing good money after bad. Let them go. It's a tough year, a write-off. We'll hope for better weather next season." Certainty. That was the thing that struck her. He wasn't being cruel. He wasn't being dismissive. He was being certain. He had run the numbers. He had seen the contracts. He knew how the system worked. And in his system, her cherries were worthless. His kindness was more devastating than anger would have been. You can't fight kindness. You can't argue with someone who genuinely believes they are helping you. It's the loneliest fight there is. She looked at him. A good man. A kind man. A man who had just told her that her entire year, her entire farm's output, was garbage. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She just nodded. She got back in her truck. She drove the 25,000 pounds of cherries home. She backed the truck up to the edge of the woods, and she dumped them all on the ground. A river of red, a fortune dissolving into the dirt. She walked back to the house, the farmhouse her grandfather built. The air inside was cool and still. It smelled of old wood and Robert's pipe tobacco. She sat down at the kitchen table. Robert had built the table from a single slab of maple cleared from their own land. She ran her hand over its smooth surface. On the wall was a framed photograph. Her grandfather, Thomas, a stern-looking man with clear eyes. He was standing in the first orchard, the trees just saplings. He held a shovel in one hand. She remembered something he told her when she was a little girl. She had been upset about something small, a broken toy, a scraped knee. He had knelt down, his face smelling of soil and sun. He had held up a clump of dirt in his palm. He said, "They can take a lot of things from you in this life." He said, "But they can't take the dirt." He said, "The land gives you what you need, Ellie. You just have to be smart enough to see it." The words echoed in the quiet kitchen. You just have to be smart enough to see it. Frank Gable saw a problem, a blemish, a defect. He saw a system, and her cherries didn't fit. Eleanor looked out the window at her trees, the trees her grandfather planted. She wasn't seeing a problem, she was seeing a harvest. The system was the problem, not her fruit. She got up from the table. She went to the small office off the living room. She pulled out the local phone book. The paper was thin, the print was small. She started with the B's. Bakeries. She called every pie shop and bakery within 100 miles. The answer was always the same. "No, ma'am. We buy our cherries pitted and processed, from the co-op mostly. We don't have the equipment to handle fresh fruit, especially not 50,000 pounds of it." They were polite. They were sympathetic. They were useless. She moved on to Jay's, jam and jelly makers. Same story. "We have contracts. We have standards. We can't use fruit with blemishes." By late afternoon, the phone felt heavy in her hand. The list of names in the phone book was covered in crossed-out lines. Every call was a door closing, a quiet, polite refusal. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever had a door closed in your face? Not with a slam, but with a gentle click. Not out of malice, but out of rules, out of policy, out of, "I'm sorry, that's just the way we do things here." It's a specific kind of despair. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been there. Because what Eleanor did next is for anyone who has. She sat there, staring at the phone, defeated. On the table next to the phone was a stack of magazines, local publications, the Leelanau Ledger, Traverse magazine. The top one was a glossy food magazine. The cover story was about the burgeoning craft distillery scene in northern Michigan. There was a picture of a young man with a beard standing in front of a gleaming copper still. The headline read, "From Grain to Glass, the Terroir of Michigan Spirits." She picked it up. She read the article. It talked about distillers using local corn, local rye, local botanicals. It used words she didn't understand: esters, phenols, maceration. But one word jumped out at her: source. The article said these new distillers were obsessed with their source material. They believed the flavor of their final product was tied directly to the land it came from, the dirt. Her grandfather's voice echoed again. The land gives you what you need. She looked at the name of the distillery in the article, Peninsula Spirits. The owner's name was Julian Croft. She found the number. She picked up the phone one last time. She dialed. A man answered. "Peninsula Spirits, Julian speaking." His voice was young, energetic. She took a breath. She said, "My name is Eleanor Matheson." She said, "I have a strange question for you." She said, "Do you have any use for ugly cherries?" Julian Croft arrived the next morning. He drove a dusty Subaru, not a pickup truck. He wore hiking boots and a plain gray t-shirt. He looked more like a grad student than a businessman. Eleanor met him in the yard. She had been expecting skepticism, pity maybe. She was not expecting his first question. He didn't ask about the blemishes. He didn't ask about the fungus. He pointed to the ground. He asked, "What's your soil type? Kalkaska sand?" Eleanor was taken aback. "Mostly," she said. "A little more clay down in the south orchard." He nodded, as if she'd just confirmed a scientific theory. "Can I see the trees?" he asked. She walked him out to the oldest block, the trees her grandfather planted. Julian didn't look at the fruit at first. He looked at the trunks, the bark, the graft unions. He ran his hand over the gnarled wood. He asked about the rootstock. Mazard or Mahaleb? She told him it was Mahaleb. He nodded again. Good, more winter hardy. Produces a more concentrated fruit flavor. Then he looked at the cherries. He saw the brown spots. He didn't flinch. He picked one. He didn't just pop it in his mouth. He held it. He crushed it gently between his thumb and forefinger. Red juice ran down his hand. He raised it to his nose. He closed his eyes. He inhaled deeply. "Wow," he said. It was quiet, reverent. He said, "The aromatics are incredible. Almond, cinnamon, a little bit of black pepper." Then he tasted it. He chewed it slowly, thoughtfully. His eyes were still closed. "The balance is perfect," he said. "Great acid to cut the sweetness. The bricks must be over 18. It was. It was 18.5. She hadn't even told him. He opened his eyes. He looked at her. "Mrs. Matheson," he said, "the blemishes, the leaf spot, it doesn't matter for what I do. When you ferment and distill, you're breaking everything down to its chemical essence. You're separating the alcohol and the flavor compounds from the solids. The skin, the pulp, that all gets left behind. I'm not looking at the cherry. I'm looking for the cherry, the soul of it. And this is exactly what I've been looking for." Eleanor stood there, among the trees she had known her whole life, and for the first time a stranger was seeing them the way she did, not as a commodity, but as something unique, something with a soul. "Let's talk numbers," he said. She braced herself. She thought of Frank Gable's offer, 8 cents a pound. Julian pulled out a small notebook. "What did the co-op offer you for juice grade?" She told him. He scribbled it down. 8 cents. He tapped his pen. "That's insulting," he said. "That doesn't even cover your harvest costs." He looked at her, his expression serious. "Mrs. Matheson, I'm just starting out. I'm small. But I believe in paying for quality. And more than that, I need to secure an exclusive source. I want to build my brand around your orchard. I want to put your family's name on my bottle. To do that, I need to make it worth your while. I need to make sure you're still here next year, and the year after that." He wrote a number in his notebook. He turned it around and showed it to her. It said, $14 per pound. $14, not cents, dollars. Eleanor did the math in her head. She did it twice to be sure. The co-op had valued her remaining 50,000 pounds at $4,000, a number that would have put her deep in the red. Julian Croft was valuing that same 50,000 pounds at $700,000. She stared at the number. It didn't seem real. It was more money than the farm had cleared in the last decade. She felt a tremor in her hands. She steadied herself against the trunk of her grandfather's tree. Julian saw her expression. "Is that fair?" he asked. She found her voice. It was a whisper. "It's fair," she said. "Word gets around in a small town. It travels on the wires of gossip and speculation. Eleanor Matheson didn't dump her crop. She sold it. To some city kid with a distillery. The talk at the grain elevator, at the post office, was a mix of disbelief and derision. $14 a pound? That's a damn lie. No one pays that for cherries, especially not spotted ones. The kid must be a fool. Or a crook. He'll be bankrupt by Christmas." Some were happy for her, glad she didn't take a total loss. But even they couldn't quite believe the number. It felt like a lottery win, dumb luck, not a new business model. Frank Gable heard the rumors. He felt a complicated mix of emotions. He was relieved. He genuinely hadn't wanted to see Eleanor lose her farm. But underneath the relief was something else, something uncomfortable, a prickle of doubt. He had been so sure. He had advised her with the full weight of his experience, his knowledge of the market, his certainty. If the rumors were true, his certainty had been wrong, spectacularly wrong. He started driving the long way home from work, past the Matheson place. He saw Julian's truck there every day for a week. He saw a crew of young people, friends of Julian's from the city, helping with the harvest. They weren't using a shaker. They were picking by hand, carefully, like they were handling jewels. He saw them loading the cherries into small refrigerated bins, not massive tanks. It was all wrong. It was inefficient. It was not how things were done. And yet, it was happening. He saw the last truck pull away. He saw Eleanor in the yard, talking with Julian. She was smiling. It was a smile he hadn't seen in years. Frank Gable kept driving. The uncomfortable feeling in his gut was growing. It felt like the ground shifting under his feet. The next 5 years were a quiet revolution. It happened one bottle at a time. 2015. Julian released the first batch of Matheson Tart Cherry vodka. He made 500 cases. He drove it to stores and bars himself in his Subaru. It sold out in 3 weeks. Eleanor used her money to pay off the farm's operating loan. For the first time in her life, she was debt-free. Cash. 2016. Julian doubled his production. 1,000 cases. A critic from a Detroit newspaper called it the purest expression of Michigan summer I've ever tasted. That year, the vodka won a silver medal at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. Eleanor bought a new tractor, a John Deere 5075E. She didn't finance it. She paid for it in full, cash. Frank Gable saw the new tractor in her barn when he drove by. It was smaller, more efficient than Robert's old 4020. It was a sign. Things were changing. 2017. A food magazine in New York wrote a story about Peninsula Spirits. They focused on the single orchard sourcing. They told the story of the ugly cherries. The narrative was irresistible. rejection, redemption. Julian was no longer just a distiller, he was a visionary. Eleanor was no longer just a farmer, she was an artisan. That year, Eleanor invested in a new drip irrigation system. It conserved water and delivered nutrients directly to the tree's roots. Her yields went up by 20%. Her fruit quality was better than ever. The leaf spot was still there some years. It didn't matter anymore. 2018, double gold, the highest prize at the San Francisco competition. Peninsula Spirits was no longer a local secret. It was a national brand. Orders came in from California, Texas, New York. Julian had to expand his distillery. He hired 10 full-time employees. He signed a 5-year, multi-million-dollar contract with Eleanor. She bought the 40-acre parcel of land adjacent to hers, the one her family had been forced to sell during the Depression. She bought it back. Cash. 2019. The man from Chicago stood in Julian's distillery. He talked about market penetration and case orders. He held the bottle that had started it all, the bottle full of worthless cherries. He had no idea. He saw a product. He didn't see the quiet woman who had refused to let her grandfather's legacy rot on the ground. He didn't see the dirt. By 2020, the ground had shifted for everyone. The big processors, the ones who bought from the co-op, were squeezing prices. Global competition was fierce. The model of selling an undifferentiated commodity fruit was breaking down. The Leelanau Agricultural Cooperative was losing members. Farms were going under. Frank Gable felt like the captain of a slowly sinking ship. He had done everything right, everything by the book. But the book was becoming irrelevant. One afternoon in August, he knew what he had to do. He drove out to the Matheson farm. He hadn't set foot on it in 5 years. The place was transformed. The fences were mended. The barns had new roofs. The old farmhouse had a fresh coat of paint. He saw a new sign at the end of the lane. It was carved from a single piece of wood. Matheson Orchard, established 1922. He found Eleanor in the south orchard pruning a young tree. She saw his truck. She didn't look surprised. She just waited. He got out, walked over. He stood before her, his hat in his hands. The silence stretched out. Finally, he spoke. His voice was hoarse. "Eleanor," he said, "I was wrong." He looked at the trees, at the healthy green leaves. That day, 5 years ago, I was so sure I was doing the right thing, so sure I was helping you. I looked at your cherries, and all I saw was how they didn't fit our system. It never once occurred to me that the system was the problem. He looked at her then. His eyes were full of a deep, painful understanding. "I wasn't protecting you," he said. "I was protecting the model. And I cost you. I don't know what I cost you." Eleanor finished her cut on the branch. She set her pruning shears down. She wiped her hands on her jeans. She looked at this man she had known her whole life. This good man, this kind man. She said, "You didn't cost me any money, Frank." She said, "You cost me the assumption that I would be seen as a partner. Instead, I was treated like a child who needed protection from her own bad decisions." Her voice was not angry. It was calm, it was factual, and it was devastating. "You're a good man, Frank," she continued. "You always have been. But the most dangerous limitation is the one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. Certainty, not cruelty, is the real enemy of progress." She picked up her shears again. She turned back to her tree. There was nothing more to say. Frank Gable stood there for a long moment. Then he turned, got in his truck, and drove away. The reckoning was over. It had been quiet, dignified, and absolute. A success story is not a story if it ends with one person. It's just an anecdote. A legacy is what happens next. It's the ripple effect. Eleanor's story did not end with her. It began with her. Julian Croft, his distillery now a major success, did not simply expand his own brand. He started the Peninsula Terroir Project. He actively sought out other farmers growing imperfect produce. He found a man in Antrim County growing heirloom apples, a variety called the black gilliflower. The apples were ugly, knobby and dark-skinned. The big grocery chains wouldn't touch them. Julian used them to create an award-winning apple brandy. He found a woman whose family had been growing Concord grapes for generations. The market for Concord juice had collapsed. He worked with her to distill a fiery, complex spirit called a grappa. He created a market where none existed. He paid fairly. He told their stories. He put their farm names on his bottles. He showed them that their product wasn't worthless. The system they were trying to sell to was worthless. Eleanor became a mentor. She didn't gloat. She taught. She hosted workshops at her farm. She taught other small growers how to identify the unique properties of their crops, how to find niche markets, how to negotiate contracts, how to not accept the first no from a gatekeeper. In 2021, she endowed a scholarship at the local community college, the Matheson Family Scholarship for Agricultural Innovation. It was for students who wanted to build new systems, not just feed the old ones. Her grandfather's words became the unofficial motto for a new generation of farmers. The land gives you what you need. You just have to be smart enough to see it. The ripple effect was real. It was changing the landscape of their community. It was creating a new kind of rural economy, one based on quality, not just quantity, one based on partnerships, not just commodities, one based on seeing the value that the old system was blind to. It was a quiet revolution, born in a quiet orchard, led by a quiet woman. Today, if you go to Eleanor Matheson's farmhouse, you'll find it much the same as it always was. It's clean, it's orderly, it smells of old wood and history. On the mantelpiece in the living room, there are two objects. On the right is the old framed photograph of her grandfather, Thomas, standing with his shovel among his sapling trees. On the left is a single unopened bottle of Matheson Tart Cherry vodka from the very first batch. The cream-colored label has faded slightly in the sun. Sometimes, at the end of a long day, Eleanor will sit in her armchair and look at them. The beginning and the proof. The man who put his faith in the dirt, and the bottle that proved he was right. She'll pick up the bottle. The glass is cool and heavy in her hands. She'll run her thumb over the words, sourced exclusively from the Matheson orchard. It's not a trophy for winning, it's a receipt. Proof of purchase for a life she was told she couldn't have. Proof that the most valuable things are often the ones that others have dismissed. Proof that one person, armed with a deep belief in their own work, can rewrite the rules for everyone. The land gave her what she needed. She was just smart enough to see it. Somewhere right now, a person is being told their work is worthless. A painter is being told their art won't sell. An entrepreneur is being told their idea is foolish. A farmer is being told their crop is blemished. And the person telling them this is not a villain. They are a friend, a mentor, a manager, a good person, armed with certainty. They believe they are protecting you from failure, but what they are really doing is protecting the world from your potential. Eleanor Matheson's story is a reminder. It is a reminder that worthless is an opinion, not a fact. It is a reminder that the system is not the only option. It is a reminder that sometimes the most innovative act is to make one more phone call. If these are the stories you believe the world needs to hear, subscribe to this channel. We are dedicated to telling the stories of the quiet fighters and the patient builders. And in the comments below, I want you to tell me about a time you were told no by someone who thought they were helping. How did you find a different path forward? Finally, if you know someone who is facing their own Frank Gable, someone who is being told their work doesn't fit the system, share this story with them. Because sometimes, all we need to keep going is to know that we are not alone. And that a blemish is only a problem if you're looking at it with the wrong eyes.